Welcome back to our conversation with the Sourdough Dude. Asher came up with some creative and inexpensive ways to get his loaves to Instagram-worthy levels. Before we get into today's episode, I want to tell you about the Cultures for Health 2022 New Year giveaway. We are giving away a bundle of our brand new Holiday Spice and Cranberry Kombucha Kit, Live Kombucha Culture, and Artisan Sourdough Kit. To enter, you can click the link below or find it on our Instagram or Facebook page. Okay, let's get into some sourdough with the Sourdough Dude. So can you give us a little bit of light into your day-to-day? I think I had heard that you keep your sourdough discard at a minimum, and we had talked last week about sourdough discard and like everything you can use for it. But it kind of sounds like you do, like you bake all the time. So I'm kind of wondering where all that bread's going, how you keep your discard to a minimum. So can you kind of just give us like, part of that education piece? Can you give us a rundown like what your sourdough baking looks like on a day-to-day, on a weekly basis, whatever you want to talk about?
Yeah, most definitely. I gotta say first, there are people out there who like really get angry about discard, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't like, do you? I'm not one of those like people. I'm not like, discard doesn't exist. And it's like, well, I mean, yeah, like in a bakery for sure, but some people discard, get over it, Mm-hmm. The reason that I don't is because bakeries don't. Mm-hmm. That is the reason. Like when I was learning how to care for my starter, there's a million resources and a million different ways to, do it, but they all essentially lead to the same place, which is mix flour and water together. Don't get it too hot. Don't get it too cold, and keep going. Right.
And you'll be okay.
I mean, that is it. Now there's so many different tips and ways people do it. Some people put a raisin in there. Some people use filtered water. I'm lucky to live in a place with exceptionally clean water in this country, so that's also a factor for me, right? There's all this different stuff, but at the end of the day, you're just fermenting flour and water. You gotta find a way that works in your place that you're doing it, right? Mm-hmm. So, for years I did discard because like I was building my starter and making it stronger and learning how to bake bread. But then I got to this point where I was dissatisfied with the bread I was baking, like most people hit a point, right? We've talked about it, or we've touched on this several times, like what do you do? It's like, I hit that point too, where I'd been baking for, I don't know, I want to say 3 months, right? My starter was 3 months old. I've been baking for 3 months. I was making bread that was edible, but it didn't look anything like what I was seeing on Instagram. Mm-hmm. And I hit that point where I was frustrated, and I was like, do I throw this in or throw whatever you say? What is it? Throw in the towel.
Throw in the towel. Yeah.
Yeah. And I decided, I want to do this. And so, the only solution that I can ever offer to anybody who gets frustrated, by all the times that we say you got to practice, right? It's like, you can do what I did, which is you can practice way more than a reasonable amount in the amount of time that you have. So that's what I did. I wanted to get good at this, and I wanted to do it faster than I was progressing. So I started baking like 10 or more loaves of bread a week, every week. And I did that for like a year. And, it's like that you can do that. And as long as you're focused and you are really practicing well, you'll get better faster, and you'll throw away bread and you'll throw away money, and your friends will be like, do you want to go out? And you'll be like, no, I have to wake up at 6 to bake bread on a Saturday. And it's not as fun, right? So if you're not somebody like me with diagnosed obsessive tendencies, give yourself room, give yourself leeway, right? That was where the no discard started, is because I was making 5 or 6 kilograms of dough every week. Whereas most people who bake on Instagram are making like 1 loaf at a time, or maybe 2. Right. And this is where a lot of the differences in information start to get confusing for people. It's because you have all of these instructions that are about how to make bread, assuming you're making a bunch of bread. Then you have all of these instructions that are how to make like a single loaf of bread, which while is very practical for many people, is mostly impractical in terms of all of bread making. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Most people who make bread around the world are not just making one loaf of sourdough at home as a treat, right? And so, I started needing more starter, and it didn't make sense to discard, because if I needed 400 or 500 grams of starter and I had 50, then that's 2 feedings away from the amount I need without discarding anything, right? Because you just feed that 50, 50, and 50, and you got 150 now.
Whoa.
Then you feed that 150, 150, 150, you got 600. You use your 500, and now you got 100 to start with again, right?
Right.
And that's what I watched bakeries doing, because I noticed that all of the professional bakers that I follow were never giving out tips about starter care or anything like that. They would just maybe show an Instagram story of like a 5-gallon Cambro bucket of starter, and then shake it to watch it. Yeah. And I was like, well, they're clearly not discarding, because that doesn't make any sense. And so I just did the math. I was just like, okay, well, I just got to end up with like 10 grams of starter after I bake. I don't even feed it usually the day that I bake. I just let it be, because it just ate so much. It's gonna be fine. You know why it won't be fine? If you've trained your starter to only be happy if you feed it 2 times a day, special patent, high protein, extreme flour that you can't even get anymore because of the supply chain. And now you're feeding it King Arthur all purpose and it won't rise. And it's like, well, yeah, that's because you made it needy. Now, I'm not saying that some environments don't warrant that. They do, right? They do, right? But not mine. I live in a temperate place, right? It's like 25 degrees, 20 degrees at night during the dead of winter. And most of the time, it ain't going to get much colder than that. We had our first 100-degree day in like 100 years last summer, So overall, my starter's pretty happy. I never throw it in the fridge. I bake, and then I don't feed it for a day or two, and then feed that 50 grams up to about 150, and then feed that up to about 450, and rinse and repeat. And there ain't no reason that, there ain't no reason not to do that if you find yourself throwing away your discard. If you don't throw away your discard, there's a million things to do with it. RE, the last episode of this podcast with Josh, and a million other things. If you get Rose Hill Sourdough's ebook, right? There's all sorts of discard recipes and stuff, all sorts of stuff. I'm not saying you should stop discarding if you're using it and enjoying it, right? What I am saying is that if you're one of those people who, like me, was going, man, I don't know why I'm pouring this down the sink.
Which is bad for your sink, ladies.
Which is bad for your sink. But I'm just sitting there. Well, full disclosure, this was at the house that was getting condemned, so we didn't care. But anyway, but you get what I'm saying. If you're one of those people that, like me, was like, I don't want to pour this away, but I'm not making discard pancakes. It's just not my favorite thing. You don't have to. You can, and actually during the pandemic, there was a cute little. That sounds demeaning for me to say it that way. There was I actually agree with it. It was a cool movement, like little sub thing that happened where it was like hashtag tiny starter or something like that. And it was people kind of trying to spread that around and explain, sort of like make that a more popular idea on like bread Instagram. The idea that you really only need to save like I could do this way more efficiently. I could calculate it so I only save 5 grams of starter, right? And then feed that 10 and 10, and then feed that 50 and 50. And sometimes I do if I've got like a holiday bake and I want to make sure it's right. But at the end of the day, if you can get your starter to be happy and healthy on a schedule, that's great. But it doesn't mean you can't adjust that starter's happy, healthy feeding schedule over time. So like I said, when I started, I fed every day at 100% hydration and discarded every day and yada, 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 right? And I've changed a lot of those things, right? Like I keep my starter at 85% hydration. It's happier that way. I don't do it because I want to. I do it because the starter prefers it. And when I do that, it has a better health, its health is better on its schedule. Some would argue that I'm mean to my starter and I don't take care of it. I would argue that I've built a resilient starter that makes good bread without over caring for it. At the end of the day, it's whatever works for you and your starter is better than trying to take my advice or anybody else's word for word on this. But that's how I don't discard. Sometimes I do, man. Sometimes, it's like, oh man, it's been 4 days. I haven't fed her. I feed her at like a 1 to 8 to 10 ratio, right? So that it can really rejuvenate itself. Then I'll discard a chunk of that because I don't have anything to do with it. And throwing away 200 grams of starter once a month is no big deal in the grand scheme versus doing it every day or every 2 days. So, as much as I wish you could have been like, so what do you think about sourdough discard? And be like, it doesn't exist, man. It's a myth. Everybody's wrong. I think that it's a totally good tool and method if that's what works for you. But if, like me, you've been wondering if there's a way to cut it out, just do a little math.
That's all it takes. Just a little math.
I mean, I ain't taken a math class since I was 17 years old, and I figured it out, right?
The last math class I took was culinary math, so we good.
See, I ain't even done that. When I was figuring out baker's percentages, I did that wrong for like months and months.
Yeah, I had a whole class on baker's percentages.
Everyone should. It would make
maybe that's what we'll do
easier.
we'll do that on our next podcast. Maybe.
Yo, I'll just say right now, if you don't get baker's percentages, hit me up because I really get them now after doing it wrong for a long time. And like that's the other thing is another question that I feel like a ton of people get asked a lot of the time is, hey, do you have a recipe for just one loaf of bread? And it's like, yes, I do. All of my recipes are for however much bread you want to make because they're all in percentages, right? But if you don't understand percentages, that answer makes no sense. So hit me up.
Yeah, definitely. I think
or hit up Kara.
Yeah, I'm here too. But yeah, I think that's part of what's so daunting about the process for some people is like talking about hydration and talking about baker's percentages and like coming from a world where like that's not an everyday practice, right? Like I said, I took classes on that. I went to culinary school. So like, of course I'm going to take classes on that.
Right. If you didn't, it'd be a weird culinary school.
Right. But I think sometimes that's what strikes people is like, oh, just make a dough with 70% hydration, 1% of salt.
And it's like 70% of what, fam? Like,
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
but
I totally agree.
But I think that helps people, like when you understand those kind of percentages or ratios or whatever you want to call it, I think it really helps people cater to their own needs. Like understanding a percentage recipe makes it feel so much more flexible and kind of like uniquely yours almost. And like being able to do the amount that you need, the amount that you want. So you're not wasting half a loaf of bread because you made 3 pounds and suddenly the recipe's like, this should be a 2-pound loaf. And you're like, how the hell did I get a 3-pound loaf? Yep. Like we hear now, but okay. Like you can. Exactly. I love backtracking out of baker's percentages because I can just say, okay, I want to end up with a loaf that's 1.5 pounds. How do I get there? Let me get to my percentages. And I think that's a really valuable skill to have as a sourdough baker. Can I just
as somebody who's into it, like you start to think about all recipes and formulas in terms of percentages, and it starts making it a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just want to ask you a quick question. You said that like over the weekend you would bake like 10 loaves. What did you do with those loaves? Like, did you give them away to friends? Did you eat them all? Did you freeze them? Yeah.
Nope, I would just give them away. I would save 1 or 2 at the time. So this was back when I was living in that, I've mentioned a couple times, this was like a rundown, like 100-year-old house with like the porch falling off, and it was in the heart of the city of Seattle. So me and 4 other guys lived there and paid like $350 a month for rent, which is, not a thing. Right.
Right.
So there, it was a dude house of 5 dudes, So while the four of us were waiting on the one bathroom we all shared, right, we would all eat bread. So I'd save a couple of loaves for us. But outside of that, nope, I was still teaching at the time. So I would bring them to the school because, I mean, shocker, most teachers don't eat breakfast. And so that would be a pretty surefire way to both get rid of it, but also make sure that, I mean, like I said, I'm a nurturer. So it's like, it was just kind of like, well, of course I'll bring these to my coworkers. They need to eat. Like they're always great. And so, so it was a lot of that. Anytime anything happened, it would be like, oh, my boss's daughter graduated from high school and I've never seen the kid, but I guess I'll score 2018 into a loaf of bread and give it to my boss so they can have it at their dinner. It's like, any excuse to give away a loaf of bread, I would give one away. Then when the pandemic hit, I got back into baking that much because I was like, well, I'm just going to put these in a box and just put them out in the courtyard of my apartment building just in case anyone's hurting, So it's like, it was good to have developed like the starter process, of making a bunch back then when I got back into it. At the end of the day, it would look very much like I bake now, actually, which is just I build that starter over 2 feeds. And then on that 3rd day, it's dough day. And then the 4th day is bake day. And then 2 days later, or a day later, that 2 feed process starts again. Right. And that's a week. And so I would really just schedule it so that all of the building would happen late weekdays. Dough day was Saturday, bake day was Sunday. Right. And the Mike from Rosehill, actually, in his ebook, there is a formula and a method that he and I worked out together. That is basic, like I think we called it like 9 to 5 sourdough or something like that. But the idea of it is that it is one take on how to make sourdough. It's very different from how I make sourdough. But the idea is that you never have to spend more than like 5 to 10 minutes touching the dough. And you can do this recipe assuming you work like a 9 to 5 or that kind of general schedule. If you have a 10-hour chunk of your day that you're not going to be able to do anything with the dough. And so, it was just more based around timing and baker's percentages, right? Building that starter so it's ready to go when you need it. And then timing that out so that you're starting your dough at an efficient time to do whatever you have to do, right? So that was a lot of night stuff for me when I was working, meaning I would build the starter and do its last feed like Friday morning, get back from work at 5, and that starter would be super ready to go. And then I would make my dough then. And if you watch my YouTube video on sourdough bread, which is actually super outdated now, like I do it completely differently now.
Great. Yeah,
Thank you. Great. I mean, because that video is more or less that method. And that's why I leave it up, is because I think it's valuable for people to see that you can make pretty consistent bread, not being able to just devote all your time or even a lot of it to the process. Right. And so what I would do is I'd make the dough and then it would bulk for like 4 or 5 hours. Right. And then I would throw it in the fridge in bulk and then take it out Saturday morning, scale, shape, and throw them back in the fridge. And then it was kind of it was like up to the starter. It's like, if these loaves were ready to go after 12 hours, then boom, it's a night, it's a Saturday night bake. If they need longer, Sunday morning, right?
Right.
And, part of that was developing the temperature control, which is a huge thing that most people don't really encounter and factor in until, in my opinion, a ways into their journey, because it's a lot of minutia at first. And it feels like a lot when most of the time you're able to just make your bread. But as soon as you start controlling the temperature, you are drastically more in control of your bread. Right. And that's the biggest thing that I learned from that, was just learning, like, I don't have the time to spend an hour handling my dough. I have to be able to adjust each time I touch it if it needs something different. Period. Right. Yeah. And that's just it. Respond to the dough, you know? And yeah, once in a while, that meant that I made it to Sunday night and those loaves were not proofed. And I was like, let's see. And I braked Frisbees. You learn.
We've all done it. Yeah. We've all done it. We've all done it. It's like, man, 36 hours, they've got to be ready. If you're thinking that, you're convincing yourself. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think even today, as someone who's been baking bread for the last 10 years, I'll still get the occasional, you know, like Frisbee disc, hockey puck, whatever you want to call it. I'm just like, dang, like, you know, like now I can kind of predict it coming. Like I'll put something in the oven and I'll be like, you know, this is probably like, we'll see. It'll be a fun experiment. That's what I always tell myself. This is going to be a fun experiment. Exactly. You know? Everything can be learned from. Almost everything tastes good toasted. For sure. Yeah. Or on croutons, or as breadcrumbs. Yeah. There's a million ways to do. Yeah. You know, it's really hard to fail with sourdough to the point that you would actually get sick from eating it. And that's just like any other food. Yeah. You know, you'll know when you put it in your mouth. You'll go, this is wrong. This tastes like acid. You know, you're like, this is bad, you know? Right. Yeah, for sure. So going back to kind of the start of the question of like baking 10 loaves, what do you do with them? Yeah. How do you do it? You know, I think one of the things that you pride yourself on is being like an at-home sourdough baker. How do you adapt your kitchen to 10 loaves? You know, because I feel like some people feel like all they can fit, you know, they only have 2 Dutch ovens, so all they can do is 2 loaves. So how did after all this time or during all this time, how have you adapted maybe like a larger bake to your home kitchen so that you have, because I think there's plenty of people out there who would love to send their kid to school with a loaf of sourdough bread, and you know, their teachers would love it for sure. You know, there's definitely options out there, and like that is an option to reduce or prevent sourdough discard, is just baking more and giving it away. How do you adapt that to your home life? You know, I think a lot of people struggle with like finding a mixer that can hold up to the pool of a 1.5 pound loaf, you know. Right. What have you done to fit what you have in your house or your apartment? Well, for starters, you know, if you're trying to make more than 1 loaf of bread, honestly, even if you have like the KitchenAid Professional, that ain't gonna do it. You know, that it ain't gonna do it. Like those mixers they're not designed for that type of bread dough mixing. Even if you have the spiral hook, right? You still, like, there's a great account called Barbells and Bread, friend of mine named Mick out in Australia, or actually, I think he might be in New Zealand. I don't want to be like, he's from this place and be wrong, but he's really good guy. Look him up. And Barbells and Bread. And he actually starts, I think, all of his doughs in a KitchenAid mixer, right? And he bakes incredible bread. So, of course, there's plenty of ways to do it. I have made sourdough in my KitchenAid, yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to make more than like a loaf of bread, you're going to have to mix it with your hands. Definitely worth reading Jim Leahy's work, just because, you know, or just look up No Knead Bread and find that guy's name and start reading about, you know, that stuff, because you really, you got to learn, you know, part of feeling that dough is learning how much you really do need to mix it, and then just letting time do the rest, and yada, yada, yada. So, but the point is, once you're over that little hump of like, okay, I've made all this dough, because really, like, I just ordered a bus bin tub like you get in a restaurant, just a Carlisle bus bin tub. Yeah, which is the classic fermenting tub. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. But here's another, if you don't want to do that, or you don't have a restaurant supply, or ordering from a restaurant supply is, you know, prohibitive for where you are, just go to the hardware store and go to their like plastic tote section, and then look up on your phone every plastic thing in the United States has to have a symbol on it with a number and a shape. You look up the key and you will find which ones are food safe, and you will find which ones are dishwasher safe. And then if you're not making a full-on bus bin worth of tub, like, you can see it behind me. I know the video isn't on podcast, but you see that
bin right there
Oh,
with
yeah.
the blue lid. That is a shoe storage box that is made to fit
Classic.
4 pairs of shoes, but its
Right.
plastic is dishwasher safe and food grade,
Mhm.
meaning you can do your dough in that. Go spend $4 at Ace Hardware or, you know, Hardwick's
or
or wherever.
Target.
And
Yeah.
wherever, you know, and you've got yourself, you know, a thing that you can mix a big amount of dough in.
Yeah,
so
I can't
then
tell you
once
how many times I've. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say
No,
I
what were you
can't
gonna
tell you
say?
how many times I've fermented a dough in a Target like storage bin that I initially bought
Yep.
for like storing things, and then I was like, I need a container for dough, and I would like dump my things out, wash it, and throw my dough in. It's everywhere.
You know the big Sterilite brand flat ones that are made to go under the bed? Those are not dishwasher safe, but they are food grade. So if you don't want to spend a lot of money on dough trays, if you make pizza doughs, right? If you make lots of pizza, again, you can get one of those at your hardware store. You can get one of those at Target. You can get one of those at your local department store, right? And they're like $8, right? So that's thing one is just get something that will really hold your dough. Go bigger than smaller if you think if you're because the worst thing is to have too much dough and then have your container just like lifting up with your dough. And it's like
mushrooming. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun and it's a cool picture, but like it's inconvenient. So go bigger than smaller. You know, you can it doesn't matter. Step 2, or answer the question part 2, which was like, how do I do all that in not, how do I bake 10 loaves in not 10 hours? So, all right, I just got to say, I don't normally like, I didn't even put it on my Instagram story, right? Because it's Amazon and it's like, you know, there's some things that, you know, we all know, right? But out of nowhere today, I found out that the baking stone that I use is available on Amazon again after not being available for like 2 years. The brand is Outset, right? And what it is it's actually a pizza grill stone. Like the material is rated for a grill. It's 14 by 16 inches, so it should fit in pretty much every home oven, even like the British size ones or like the New York studio size ones. But it is still wide enough to fit 2 6 or 8 inch batards on. It's not very expensive as far as pizza stones go. And what makes this one special is that it's not the only one like this, but it is designed to go on grills. So it's rated to go up to like 1400 degrees, which means that it holds heat way better than your standard one from Bed Bath & Beyond. So baking 10 loaves, you don't have to deal with preheating the stone or preheating your Dutch ovens or all of those things, because that stone stays hot on top of being big enough to fit 2 loaves at once. So then you get to the issue of steam. If you're listening to this and you don't know that you need to put steam in when you bake your sourdough, like I didn't for the first month,
put steam in.
You have to. Otherwise, your bread's going to keep turning out and you're like it is. And you're going to continue being confused while the crust is all thick and hard. And I literally called my dad because I was frustrated. I went back to the actual square one of my fundamental baking knowledge. And I was like, Dad,
how do I do this?
Actually, he didn't. I just showed up at his work, if I'm going to be totally honest. He didn't have a phone. He's not a cell phone person. So that was the only way that I could. So I showed up at his work and he's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I can't, I need help. He's like, do you have a Dutch oven? I'm like, no, I'm just throwing on a pizza stone. And he was like, well, there's your problem, right? So you get to the issue of steam, right? Dutch ovens solve this, of course, because they just trap the steam from the loaf. If you have like a Challenger bread pan or like a big turkey roasting pan, same thing. It's all just it's all just a closed environment. It's just a closed environment. So at the time, this was back in the, condemned house days. I didn't have $100, $50 to spend on a Dutch oven. I have a really amazing one now from the Field company that they gifted me. Shout out to them. They're incredible. If you want like a really high quality cast iron Dutch oven, hit them up. again, not an advertisement. I don't have like a discount code. They don't sponsor me. They're just really good people and they make really good products. But that's like, I probably couldn't afford that Dutch oven now. So like, right. So it's nice, so I do use them sometimes. But if you're just putting your bread on a stone, there's got to be steam. And there's a million ways to do that with like putting boiling water or lava rocks or tea towels. I am way more clumsy than that, right? There are so many burns and so many like I could convince somebody that I have been working in a kitchen with the number of like actual like the burn, the classic.
Right. Oh yeah.
So I knew from the jump that like pouring boiling water on rocks in my oven was not gonna work for me. And so when I, after my dad was like, you got to steam it. And I was looking up all these ways. And I'm like, I don't know what lava rocks are. So out of desperation, I just put a loaf on because I was baking bread that day. That's why I was like, Dad.
Gosh.
I was pissed. I wanted it to work. And so out of desperation, I just slid the loaf onto the baking stone. And I just grabbed the mixing bowl the steel mixing bowl that I'd made the dough in, and I just put it on top of the loaf. And I was like, and closed the oven. And I was just like, and peace be with you.
Yeah.
And, like just, hey, here we go. Let's see. And that loaf of bread that came out from that bake, I'm pretty sure is still like if you scroll all the way down to the first Sourdough Dude post, I'm pretty sure it's that loaf of bread, because then I lifted that bowl off, and for the first time, I was like, my bread, it looks like it rose, it's crusty, right? And I was like, it worked. And now that's a pretty well-known like hack, right? Is you can just put a steel mixing bowl on your stone. And I'm really happy that that's like a well-known hack. But like all of the steps of this process, I was convinced that I could figure out how to do this more like a bakery, right? Because it's a bakery. They're doing it more efficiently than a home baker. No one can argue with anyone on that, period. It's a bakery, right? And so I just started obsessively looking at videos of deck ovens and how they worked. And I was just like, oh, well, this is literally just exactly what I've done with the bowl. It's just a shallow baking area that traps the steam. It's like a deck oven is just with a steam injector is just a giant Dutch oven. Big flat Dutch oven. Like it's the same thing. So I went on to the Webstront store and I ordered a steam table pan, like from a steam table at like a buffet. Right. Or I mean, there's a bunch of restaurant industry people. Find. Yes. I'm sorry to all of the restaurant industry people that are like listening and just rolled their eyes as I explain what a steam table pan is. But like for everyone who doesn't know, that's, when you go to the Denny's and the buffet or whatever, and the big metal flat pans, that's what they are. They're super cheap. You can get them from any restaurant supply. And I just, looked up the dimensions because they're listed in like quarter, half, right? And found the one that was as close to 14 by 16 inches as I could. And now my entire baking stone in my oven is just a mini deck oven. And that is literally how I've baked my bread now for the past like 2.5, 3 years is that no ice, no steam, no water, no towels, nothing. My bread isn't even high hydration. Like most of my loaves are cap out at like 73, 74%. I don't find I need to add that's how much water my flour absorbs. It makes good bread. I don't need to push it. There's no reason to. You're just creating more work for yourself unless I change flour. So, and that's enough water in the loaf to make the bread that I post on my Instagram. So if you look at the bread I post and you think like that, for sure he's got a Rofco, he's got to be using the RM 2020 that Campbell made or whatever. It's like, nah, I would love one of those for sure. But all I'm doing is what those do. It's just, I just made a mini one of it, and you can too. No, for real though. It's like, it's that easy. And so because of the high heat stone, those loaves go on fire for 20 minutes covered. That cover comes off. They actually come off of the stone because that stone stays at 515 degrees through the bake. Like it doesn't cool off. They come off the stone. I put my oven rack back in 2 shelves above the stone, throw the 2 loaves back on the oven rack
and call it
11 to 12 more minutes. And then boom. And yeah, so like my total bake time for 1 big or 2 medium loaves is like 31 to 33 minutes, which is markedly
pretty
shorter
standard
than a Dutch oven though. You see what I'm saying? It's
yeah,
like
Dutch ovens are usually
that's pretty standard for bread baking, right?
Yeah,
but for Dutch ovens,
that's where I come from. So I was like, yeah, it sounds right. Yeah,
exactly. So it's like you got all these home bakers are having to reheat their Dutch oven for another 30 minutes and before they put their second loaf in and stuff, right? And any heat that the stone lost is regained because the bread comes off of it for that last 10 to 12 minutes, right? And so that is basically the method that I came up with that, works in my environment with the dough that I'm making. And it means that I can pump out 10 plus loaves, in 4 to 5 hours if I'm being like slow, and if they're big loaves, right? If I were to make like 10 6-inch Banneton, like 650 gram loaves, you could pump that out with this exact setup I described in like, 3 to 4 hours if you're doing 2 at a time. Like it's not a hack. Like that's the thing. It's just looking at how bread ovens work and trying to make the same thing. It's the same reason cookies are better if you leave the dough in the fridge overnight. Bakeries didn't come up with that because it's some magic secret. It's because it makes no sense to bake cookies the night you make them if you're baking the bread the next morning.
Right.
So it's like, if you want your cookies to taste like bakery cookies, start there, right? It's like, it's step 1, but start there, right? There's science behind it too. And, how the fat, gets absorbed and vice versa, right? But
and you learn that as you go and you discover that as you go.
Yeah. But if it makes it better, it makes it better. So that is my baking setup. And I really haven't changed it, since I got that baking stone and the steam table pans. And it works.
Yeah. I mean, I think like we'll wrap up here in a second, but I think the common theme in everything that you've talked about today is learn what you can. Take all the books, message anyone that you feel confident and comfortable messaging, obviously both of us. Yeah, read the books, watch the videos, go to a bakery. Like if there's an open front bakery, just go to the bakery, get a coffee, and watch them bake. Like
if you're thinking of
it's
getting
satisfying.
A starter,
yeah,
go to a bakery.
Good. Ask them for one. Yeah. Always, of course, us, but there's a million.
I'm saying, like, if you are
Absolutely.
that angst at that, like, I cannot have this in my hands. Most bakeries will give you a little bit of, or sell you for $1 or whatever, a little, Jello shot container of their starter, and it's healthy and ready to go. Yeah, get one from y'all, right? That you get all y'all.
Plenty
starters.
Of options. Yeah,
there's all sorts of stuff. Don't y'all have one that's like actually from San Francisco?
It's a San Francisco style.
Gotcha. I mean, that's the good stuff.
I mean, yeah. It's one of our best sellers, so I would agree with you on that.
That is absolutely my biggest point. Is at the end of the day, this whole thing is a big process that takes practice. Be gentle on yourself. Treat it like you would with anything else you were practicing. If you tried to, buff your car, right? Having never done it before. You accidentally scratched it somehow, you would go, dang, that sucks. But I've never done this before. I'm just going to finish it up. Now I know I'll either take it somewhere or I'll do better next time. You wouldn't beat yourself up and you wouldn't give up ever buffing your car again. Hopefully you would go, dang it, be gentle with yourself and learn everything you can and learn everything that you enjoy that makes it better and fun for you.
Yeah, definitely. So one of my last questions is going to be, are there any like hard stops for you? Has there anything that you've done, that you've experimented with, that you were just like, no, 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 no one should ever do this. I'm never going to do this. Is there anything that like any method, any like mix-ins, ingredients, process wise, maybe even equipment wise, that you were just like, hey, this really didn't work and I don't think it would work for anyone, to help like warn people away from like maybe making mistakes that just really are mistakes for all of us?
At the end of the day, if you found something that somebody has, like information that somebody's put out there that they say works for them, it probably did, right? I would argue, and that's just a benefit of the doubt thing. I would argue that most people who have got some information and are willing to put it out there in good faith and aren't asking for money, it probably worked for them. That does not mean it will work for you, right? So, I rather than, I do have a answer, like a hard answer, but rather than even think about the information that you're finding in that way of like, oh, but what if this doesn't work? What if this is really just BS or whatever? I would actually argue that one should take most to all information with that little grain of salt that is, this worked for somebody else in a different space and time than me. I might have to adjust to make it fit my needs, right? Because if you're not willing to do that, you will find yourself decrying a lot of really good information because it didn't work for you. Like I don't autolyze flour and water, right? And
a lot of people do.
Even saying that starts a whole big conversation, because the next thing I say is I autolyze flour, water, and my starter. And then that starts another conversation where people start yelling at me that that's not an autolyze. But actually the word autolyze just means mix and rest. It's like, that's all that is. It's just mixing and resting it to build, strength and fusion, essentially, so that you can continue working your dough. There are doughs that I autolyze flour and water for before adding starter, because it's a tool and you should use all your tools at your disposal, right? So just because I make all my bread not autolyzing just flour and water, that does not even for a second mean that if you switch to that, your bread's going to get better. In fact, it might get worse.
Right.
We're different people doing different stuff. So, definitely take it all with a little bit of a grain of salt that way. The hard and fast line that I would draw is if you encounter information or recipes or anything that the person who's put it out there has dubbed like master, foolproof, and to be clear, not talking about full proof baking here. Full, Full proof baking is a super good account.
Yes, 100%.
Been around for a long time. Especially if you're into the science, follow Foolproof Baking. Amazing YouTube videos. One of my inspirations for starting to make YouTube videos. Cannot recommend their information enough. They will also point you towards amazing accounts to follow for more incredible information. Not that. I'm talking about people that are like foolproof, perfect focaccia every time, my master. And I'm not knocking anyone's language. I've said that before. I'm not knocking anyone's language. I've talked crazy this whole time, right? But anybody who's like, this is my master perfect sourdough recipe that I developed, that you, and every time you make it, make sure to tag me. That person is probably selling something, which is fine. You gotta make your money, right? But that person is probably selling something, and or has moved past the reality that is bread making. Because you can call your recipe my master recipe. That's not a bad, not allowed thing. Right. But if you are trying to find, I feel like it's almost trickery, right? Because if you're desperately trying to learn how to make sourdough and you finally find this recipe that's like my master perfect sourdough recipe, works for everyone, tag me if you use it, subscribe to my thing. And you go, okay, finally. And then it doesn't work. It is devastating. And now you actually spent real time, effort, forbid money, right, on somebody's interpretation of a mixture of flour, water, starter, and salt,
Right.
which is the way sourdough bread has been made since before other kinds of bread have been made.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah.
So again, you go to my website and click on bread, and at the very top, I've got my go-to sourdough recipe. It's like, I've got one too. I just call it my go-to one, just to double down on my thing here about, like, anyone can use whatever language they want. But if they're calling it that, and also you have to subscribe, or it's only available on their Patreon or whatever it is, I'm not saying they might not be great in other aspects, but I would be wary of that type of stuff when you're starting out, because there is so much cohesive, good, just killer information out there that is presented in a way that you can learn it and see where there's room for that you're going to have to need to adjust. Going back to our discussion on resources and cookbooks, you open up any cookbook from before like the 2000s, right?
Right.
And all of them say something to the effect of, these recipes are starting places for you to figure out how, you know what I mean? Especially baking books. There will always be a note in the foreword about how this is the stuff that we do and this is tried and true for us, but you may need to adjust some things. Period. You know? So if you're going to be wary of something, be wary of people who seem like it might be too good to be true, or it seems like it might be the answer to all of your sourdough qualms and issues. Because I'm telling you right now, you can just text me on Instagram and I'll get back to you in a couple days at the very latest. I ain't going to ask you to pay me nothing.
That's good advice. Well, thank you. Do you have any last words of advice before we say thank you?
No, man, thank you guys so much for having me. Seriously, I hope that everyone listening, was able to parse through all my crazy rants. I love talking to people about stuff like this. And I love, talking about like the community and the, just the love and the energy that drives the food, baking, sourdough, all of that community on Instagram, and I guess at the end of the day, I'm just going to say, like, if you're doing it, keep doing it. Like, don't stress, don't make it bigger than it has to be. Please do not feel like you gotta be the next big Instagram baker. That shouldn't be the point. And anybody on here that's got, a bunch of followers, even in the grand scheme, my follower count is not that big compared to a lot of people on here who have put so much work and important, have input so much important creativity and guidance and, everything into the community that has become on like social media about bread baking over the past couple of years and through the pandemic and throughout that, man. It's such an amazing place. So if you found yourself here baking bread, regardless of where you're at or what troubles you're having or not, hang out. This is it's a really cool, amazing, space with people. Like, we just met today. Y'all hit me up, last week. And it's like, I feel like we've been, talking this stuff for months. It's like, this is a community of amazing people talking about just pure knowledge and sharing info with each other and sharing the love. And it's an amazing place to be. Like, I can't tell you the number of times that people have hit me up and I've, given them help, or even just answered like a question with like one sentence, and they've responded with like, just, heartfelt personal thank yous. And I just, I can't be on a podcast without saying, thank you to every single one of you that's ever sent me a nice message. And, please let that be encouraging to anybody who's worried about sending anybody a message on here, because, man, it's incredible when I feel like I've been able to help somebody get over an issue or get past a block, with their bread. It really is incredible. And it's amazing. And if you don't want to hit me up, hit my website, sourdoughdude.com. Everything there is free. I update it whenever I've got a new thing, video or recipe that I publish. I've got links to all the stuff I use. If you're into that kind of stuff, it's like, I've got it all there. So you can go there if you don't even want to talk to my crazy self, over Instagram. And you can try doing stuff exactly how I do it. And when it doesn't work, you can hit me up and be like, it didn't work. Like you said, right? I'll be like, yeah, let's figure it out.
Yeah. For sure. And we're in the same boat over here too. Like
Absolutely.
everything you just said, like people are in the community because they want to share that knowledge. I think if anything, like of all the people I've met, in the sourdough community and just the fermentation community in general, like we're all so invested in sharing what we've learned and helping each other and learning from each other. Like I've never heard of sourdough with scobies before. I'd never heard of vinegar eels. Like we all have something to learn from each other. And I think regardless of where you are in your journey, it's valuable to participate and be a part of that community. So thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Cool.
It's been a blast.
Thanks for tuning in. We have more sourdough episodes in the works. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. Go give our friend, the Sourdough Dude, a visit on Instagram and see what he's up to. Oh, and one last thing. Don't forget about the Cultures for Health 2022 New Year's giveaway. We're giving away a bundle of our brand new Holiday Spice and Cranberry Kombucha Kit, Live Kombucha Culture, and Artisan Sourdough Kit. To enter, you can click the link below or find it on our Instagram or Facebook page. You don't want to miss out on this giant giveaway. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.